The silence in the room was so thick you could have plated it. Leo Croft, with his crisp Tom Ford suit and a sneer that seemed permanently stitched to his face, stared at me from across the polished mahogany table. He slid a single piece of paper toward me. My termination notice. "Your palate, Arya," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "is a liability. We're not your personal science fair. We're a business, and your little experiments are no longer cost-effective." He gestured vaguely, as if trying to swat away the last 8 years of my life. My heart wasn't breaking. It was turning to ice. I looked at him, at the 2 corporate lawyers flanking him like vultures, and I offered a small, quiet smile. "I understand," I said, and then I walked out. What Leo didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that his father had given me the keys to the entire kingdom, and he had just told me to lock the door and throw them away. My name is Arya Rossi. I'm 34 years old, and up until an hour ago, I was the chief flavor architect for Elysian Foods. It sounds like a made-up title, and in a way it was. Julian Croft, Leo's father, invented it for me. He said head of product development was too sterile for what I do. "You don't just mix ingredients, my dear," he told me years ago, his eyes twinkling. "You compose symphonies on the tongue." Now the symphony was over, or so they thought. But this story isn't just about getting fired. It's about how a secret, written into my contract by a visionary old man, allowed me to reclaim my life's work and remind a soulless corporation what it had forgotten: that a company built on art cannot survive on spreadsheets alone. This is the story of how I took back my magic, one recipe at a time. My journey to Elysian Foods wasn't a straight line. It was a meandering path paved with failures, dismissals, and the constant dull hum of being underestimated. I grew up in a tiny apartment in Queens, where the air was a permanent mix of my nonna's basil plants on the windowsill and the exhaust from the BQE. My grandmother, Elena, was my first teacher. She didn't teach me to cook so much as she taught me to listen to food. While other kids were learning multiplication tables, I was learning the difference between Sicilian oregano and Greek oregano by scent alone. She'd hand me a sprig of thyme and say, "Close your eyes, Arya. What does this feel like? Not on your fingers, but in your soul. Is it a sunny morning or a cool evening?" I had a gift, a form of synesthesia, I guess. Flavors weren't just tastes to me. They were colors, sounds, emotions. A hint of saffron was a low cello note. The bright acidity of a lemon was a flash of canary yellow. My palate was my superpower, but in the real world, it felt more like a strange, useless quirk. I went to the Culinary Institute of America, thinking I'd find my people. I was wrong. The institution was rigid, obsessed with French classical technique. My ideas, a savory cardamom and pistachio crust for lamb, a smoky paprika-infused caramel sauce, were met with raised eyebrows. "That's creative, Miss Rossi," one instructor, a chef with a mustache as stiff as his demeanor, told me, "but it is not cuisine. Stick to the fundamentals." My first job was in the pastry kitchen of a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan. The head chef, a man who yelled more than he cooked, saw me as little more than a pair of hands. I spent a year piping macarons and tempering chocolate, my own ideas locked away in a notebook. One night, during a slow service, I experimented with a lavender-infused honey for a panna cotta. He tasted it, his face unreadable. "Where did you get this idea?" he demanded. "I just thought the floral notes would complement the cream," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He grunted. "It's weird." 2 weeks later, a special appeared on the menu. Panna cotta with aromatic honey. My idea, his credit. When I tried to speak up, he just looked at me and said, "You're a line cook. Your job is to execute, not to create." That was the theme of my early career. I was a well of ideas that men with bigger egos and better titles would draw from, never once acknowledging the source. After a few more years of bouncing between kitchens, feeling more like a ghost than a chef, I was ready to quit. I was bartending to pay my rent, my culinary dreams gathering dust. That's when I got the call. A recruiter, a woman with a brisk, no-nonsense voice, said she was representing a man named Julian Croft. He's starting a new high-end food company, Elysian Foods, she said. He's looking for someone with an unconventional palate. Your name came up. I had no idea how. Maybe one of the few colleagues who'd ever shown me kindness had passed my name along. I almost said no, too jaded to face another disappointment. But something in her tone, a hint of genuine excitement, made me agree to a meeting. The interview wasn't in an office. It was in a sprawling, light-filled test kitchen in an old converted warehouse in the West Loop of Chicago. Julian Croft was nothing like the chefs I'd worked for. He was in his late 60s, with a kind, lived-in face and flour on his trousers. He didn't ask about my resume or where I'd trained. Instead, he led me to a long stainless steel table covered in dozens of small bowls containing spices, herbs, oils, and extracts from all over the world. "Forget everything you've been taught," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "I don't want to know if you can make a perfect hollandaise. I want to know what you can make that no one has ever tasted before. Show me." For 2 hours, I played. I mixed, I tasted, I combined things that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. I made a balsamic reduction infused with star anise and black pepper, a citrus salt blended with fennel pollen, a chili oil that had layers of flavor, smoky, then sweet, then a slow, lingering heat. I worked in a trance, the way I used to in my nonna's kitchen. When I was done, I had created a dozen tiny, unique flavor profiles. Julian tasted each one slowly, closing his eyes, just as I did. He didn't say a word until he had tried the last one. He opened his eyes, and they were shining. "In my 40 years in this business," he said softly, "I have met countless cooks. Many are technicians, a few are artists. But you, Arya, you are a composer." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I don't care that you're a woman in an industry full of arrogant men. I don't care that your resume doesn't have the right names on it. I care that you have a gift. I'm building this company, Elysian, on one principle: authentic, unforgettable flavor. I want your gift to be its foundation. And that day, I was reborn. I started at Elysian Foods the next week. Julian gave me total freedom. He gave me a budget that made my head spin and a team of 2 assistants. Build your library, he told me. Create a world of flavor that only we have. And I did. For the first time, I wasn't just an employee. I was a creator. My title became Chief Flavor Architect. My laboratory was my playground. We weren't just making sauces or spice blends. We were deconstructing flavor and rebuilding it in new, exciting ways. We developed a line of infused olive oils that used a proprietary cold press technique I'd perfected to preserve delicate floral notes. We created a range of gourmet finishing salts that became a must-have in high-end restaurant kitchens. Our signature product, a line of complex, shelf-stable sauces called essences, was revolutionary. They were built on my unique flavor combinations, and they made it possible for home cooks to replicate 5-star restaurant flavors. Elysian grew from a passionate dream into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. We went from a team of 5 to over 100. Our products were in every luxury grocery store and on the menus of some of the best restaurants in the country. Julian and I were partners in every sense of the word. He was the business mind, the visionary who saw the market. I was the soul, the artist who created the product that made it all possible. He wasn't just a boss. He became the father I'd lost too young. He remembered my birthday, celebrated every successful launch with a bottle of vintage champagne, and always had time to listen to my wildest ideas. About 3 years into my tenure, Julian called me into his office to discuss renewing my contract. "Arya," he began, This company's success rests on your palate. Your creations are our intellectual property, but more than that, they are your intellectual property. They come from you." He pushed a document across his desk. "I've had my lawyers add a special clause. I call it the ARIA clause." I read it, stunned. It stated that all the proprietary flavor profiles, recipes, and unique production methodologies I developed were documented in a central repository called the Flavor Atlas. This atlas was the company's core asset. The clause went on to say that this intellectual property was co-owned. The company had the exclusive license to use it as long as I was employed. If my employment was terminated for any reason, I retained the right to retrieve my intellectual property, the entire flavor atlas, after ensuring all existing product on the market was stable and safe. "Julian, this is unheard of," I stammered. "It's incredibly generous." He chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound. "It's not generosity, my dear. It's insurance. It ensures you always give us your best, because you're building your own legacy too. And," he added, his expression turning serious, "if someday I'm not here, and some fool in a suit who can't tell saffron from sawdust takes over and doesn't see your value, well, they'll learn the hard way." I signed the contract, a knot of gratitude in my throat, never imagining that I would ever need to invoke that clause. For 8 years, Elysian Foods was my sanctuary. I had a work family. My lead food scientist, Ben, was a brilliant, nerdy guy who could translate my abstract flavor ideas into stable chemistry. Our head of marketing, Chloe, was my lunch buddy and my biggest cheerleader. We worked hard, we laughed hard, and we built something beautiful together. It was perfect. And then, everything changed. The first signs were small. Julian, always so sharp and present, started to seem distant. He'd forget a conversation we'd had the day before. In a tasting meeting, he once misidentified a key ingredient in a sauce I designed with him. Something he would never have done before. I chalked it up to stress, the pressure of running a booming company. Then came the day he called me Elena, my grandmother's name. He caught himself immediately, a look of profound confusion and embarrassment on his face. "Julian, are you okay?" I asked gently after the meeting. "Just tired, Arya. Too many late nights," he said, waving it off. But the incidents grew more frequent. He started canceling our weekly creative sessions, delegating more and more to his executive team. A nervous murmur started to ripple through the company. What was going on with Julian? Then Leo Croft arrived. I knew Julian had a son, but he rarely spoke of him. The few times he did, it was with a tone of weary resignation. "Leo lives in the world of spreadsheets," Julian once told me over a glass of wine. "He sees the price of everything and the value of nothing." Leo strode into our creative headquarters one Monday morning looking like he'd just stepped out of a private equity firm's boardroom. He was in his mid-30s, with his father's height but none of his warmth. Julian introduced him as a new, strategic consultant, there to learn the business. We all knew what it meant. Succession planning had begun. My first one-on-one with Leo was a disaster. I'd prepared a presentation on our flavor development pipeline, explaining the delicate process of sourcing and my methodology for creating new essences. He cut me off 5 minutes in. "Let's get to the point," he said, tapping his pen on the table. "What's the ROI on your R&D? Your department is a significant cost center. Why are we paying a premium for saffron from Iran when a supplier in India can give it to us for 30% less?" I tried to explain that the Iranian saffron had a unique floral and honeyed note that was essential to 3 of our best-selling products, that the Indian varietal was harsher, more medicinal. He just stared at me blankly. "It's all just red threads, isn't it?" That single question told me everything I needed to know about his understanding of the company his father had built. To him, our art was just a line item. 2 months later, Julian called an all-hands meeting. He looked frail, his usual vibrant energy dimmed. "My doctors have advised me to take a medical leave," he announced, his voice thin. I've had a series of small strokes. While I focus on my recovery, Leo will be stepping in as interim CEO. A collective gasp went through the room. Julian's gaze swept across the crowd and landed on me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent, desperate plea. Protect what we built. After the meeting, as people shuffled out in a state of shock, Julian asked me to stay behind. He gripped my arm, and his hand, though trembling slightly, was strong. Arya, listen to me, he whispered urgently. Leo doesn't get it. He thinks this is all about margins and logistics. He doesn't understand that the magic is you. His eyes bored into mine. Remember your contract. That clause, it's not just for you. It's for Elysian. It's the key to the whole damn kingdom. Don't let him burn it down. I tried to reassure him, telling him Leo would learn and he'd be back soon, but we both knew it was a hollow promise. As he walked away, leaning on the arm of an assistant, I felt a profound sense of dread. The soul of Elysian Foods had just left the building. Leo wasted no time in remaking Elysian in his own image. The first thing to go was the culture. Our flexible work hours were replaced by a rigid 9-to-5 schedule with mandatory time-tracking software. The artisanal coffee and snack bar Julian had insisted on, calling it fuel for creativity, was replaced with a standard vending machine. Leo's mantra, repeated in every meeting, was optimization. He brought in a team of consultants, all sharp-suited men who spoke in buzzwords and looked at our test kitchen with a mixture of disdain and confusion. My department was their primary target. My budget was slashed. My requests for rare ingredients were met with demands for a cost-benefit analysis. Why do we need yuzu from Japan? Leo asked during one excruciating budget meeting. Can't we just use lemon juice and grapefruit zest? The consumer won't know the difference. The consumer of a $7 bottle of finishing sauce absolutely knows the difference, Leo, I argued, my frustration mounting. Our brand is built on that difference. He just shook his head. That's legacy thinking, Arya. We need to be scalable. The consultants shadowed my team, questioning every step of our process. A young man named Todd, who'd probably never cooked anything more complicated than toast, watched my lead scientist, Ben, performing a delicate vacuum distillation. Couldn't you just boil it? Todd asked, looking at his clipboard. Ben looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. I stepped in. No, Todd. Boiling it would destroy the volatile aromatic compounds. The entire point of this process is to capture the essence of the ingredient without heat. Todd just scribbled a note. Seems inefficient, he muttered. The final report from the consultants recommended a complete overhaul of my department. They proposed replacing my custom-developed methodologies with standardized industrial food production techniques. They suggested substituting dozens of our unique, high-quality ingredients with cheaper, mass-market alternatives. The report claimed this would achieve 90% of the flavor profile at 40% of the cost. What it didn't say was that the remaining 10% was the entire reason our customers paid a premium for Elysian products. It was the magic. It was the soul. I was systematically cut out of major decisions. Meetings I used to lead were now run by Leo and his team. I felt like a ghost haunting my own creation. Chloe, my friend from marketing, found me in the break room one afternoon, staring grimly into a cup of vending machine coffee. "You look like you're about to poison someone," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm just watching 8 years of work get dismantled by a guy who thinks flavor is an algorithm," I replied. "It's happening everywhere," she confided in a low voice. "He's slashing the marketing budget, wants to cut our print ads in upscale food magazines. Says we should be focusing on TikTok influencers who'll work for free product." And the breaking point came during the development of a new product, a truffle and porcini mushroom essence. It was supposed to be our big holiday launch. I had worked for months on the formula, balancing the earthy notes of the mushrooms with a hint of garlic and thyme. Leo, against my strenuous objections, insisted we use a cheaper synthetic truffle aroma oil instead of the Italian white truffle infusion I had specified. No one will know the difference, and it saves us 60% on material costs, he declared. I warned him that synthetic truffle oils were notoriously unstable and could develop a chemical gasoline-like aftertaste over time. He waved me off. Your perfectionism is too expensive, Arya. We went into production. 3 weeks later, I pulled a case from our first batch to test its shelf life, just as I always did. I opened a bottle. The smell that hit me wasn't the rich, earthy aroma of truffles. It was the acrid chemical stench of petroleum. It was ruined. Every single bottle of our 10,000 unit first run was garbage. I took a bottle directly to Leo's office. He was on a conference call, laughing about a golf game. I didn't wait for him to finish. I opened the bottle and set it on his desk. The foul smell filled his pristine minimalist office. His smile vanished. "What is this?" he snapped. "This is your 60% savings," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "This is what happens when you replace art with a spreadsheet. I warned you this would happen." For a second, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by anger. He wasn't mad at the mistake. He was mad that I was right. "This is a quality control issue," he hissed, ending his call. "This is your department's failure to properly vet an ingredient." "My department vetted it, Leo. I told you not to use it. You overruled me." He stood up, his face red. "Your job is to execute my vision for this company. If you can't do that, maybe you're not a fit for the new Elysian." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The next day, I received a formal performance improvement plan in my email, citing my resistance to new cost-saving protocols and negative impact on team morale. It was a fabrication, a clear move to build a paper trail to get rid of me. I knew then it was only a matter of time. I went home that night, and for the first time in years, I opened the file on my laptop containing my original employment contract. I read the Aria clause over and over again. Julian's words echoed in my head. "If some fool in a suit doesn't see your value, well, they'll learn the hard way." The stage was set. All I had to do was wait for the curtain to fall. The final act came on a Tuesday morning. I received a calendar invitation from Leo's assistant. The subject line was simply, "Meeting." The location was the main boardroom. The attendees were Leo, 2 men I didn't recognize, and a lawyer from HR. My heart didn't race. It settled into a calm, steady beat. This was it. I took a moment to look around my lab, the place where I had felt more at home than anywhere else on Earth. I touched the cool stainless steel countertop, inhaled the familiar scent of spices and creativity. Then I smoothed down my dress, took a deep breath, and walked toward my own execution. I entered the boardroom. The 2 unfamiliar men were introduced as representatives from a large-scale food manufacturing conglomerate. They had the slick, predatory look of sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. Leo didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Arya," he began, steepling his fingers, "as you know, we're moving Elysian in a new, more profitable direction. We're streamlining our production and focusing on scalable growth." He gestured to the men. "Our new partners will be taking over the manufacturing of our core product lines." I looked at him, my expression neutral. "You're licensing my formulas to them." Leo's smile was thin and triumphant. "We are, which brings us to you. Your role, as it was originally conceived, is, redundant." The HR lawyer slid a folder across the polished table. "This is a standard severance agreement," she said. 2 weeks' pay in exchange for your signature on an updated, more comprehensive non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. I didn't even look at it. My contract stipulates 6 months severance for termination without cause, I stated calmly. Leo scoffed. "Your recent performance review, your failure on the truffle essence launch, we have ample cause." The truffle essence failed because you overruled my professional judgment on ingredient sourcing, I countered, my voice even, an event I documented in detail at the time. Leo's face hardened. His mask of corporate civility was starting to crack. This was the moment. The moment he had been waiting for, the moment to finally put the artsy, difficult woman who reminded him of his father's old ways in her place. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. Let me be perfectly clear. Your professional judgment has been a bottleneck to progress. My father may have been sentimental. He may have indulged your little artistic whims, but I am running a business. We sell products in jars, not precious little masterpieces. He stood up, his voice rising, the performance clearly intended for his new partners. Your palette, Arya, your so-called gift, it's a liability. We're not your personal science fair. We're a business, and your little experiments are no longer cost-effective. You are a relic of a past we are moving beyond. The silence that followed was heavy. The HR lawyer looked uncomfortable. The two suits just watched, impassive. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a scene in a movie. The rage and hurt were there, but they were encased in a layer of cold, hard resolve. I looked directly at Leo into his cold, angry eyes. I let a beat of silence pass. Then I gave him that same small, quiet smile. I understand, I said. That was all. That's it? He sneered, clearly disappointed by my lack of a dramatic outburst. 8 years, and all you have to say is I understand. I picked up my purse. There's nothing else to say. I stood, turned, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. 2 security guards were waiting for me outside the door, another piece of theater for Leo's benefit. They escorted me back to my lab, where they watched, stone-faced, as I packed my few personal belongings into a small box, a framed photo of me and Julian, a worn copy of Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, a coffee mug from my team. Ben and Chloe tried to approach, their faces etched with concern and outrage, but the guards blocked them. Company policy, one of them mumbled, looking at the floor as I was escorted through the building, a parade of one, past the faces of people I had worked with, mentored, and laughed with for years. I felt a deep, profound sadness. Not for myself, but for them, for what was being lost. At the front door, the guard took my ID badge, the final symbolic severance. As the glass doors slid shut behind me, I stepped out into the bright Chicago sunlight. I took a deep breath of the city air. Leo thought he had won. He thought he had cut out the expensive, problematic heart of the company and replaced it with a sleek, efficient machine. He had no idea he had just handed me the scalpel. The first thing I did when I got back to my apartment was not cry. It was not scream. It was not even pour a drink. I made myself a cup of tea, a custom blend of chamomile, lemon balm, and rose hips that I kept for moments of extreme stress. Then I sat down at my dining room table, opened my laptop, and pulled up my Elysian Foods employment contract. I read Section 8, the ARIA clause, one more time. Upon termination of employment for any reason, employee shall retain full ownership of the intellectual property contained within the proprietary database known as the Flavor Atlas. Company shall retain a license to existing product formulas for a period of 90 days to ensure market stability. Employee reserves the right to retrieve all proprietary data, including but not limited to process methodologies, ingredient sourcing specifications, and developmental notes after certifying that no immediate risk is posed to consumers by products currently in circulation. The language was ironclad. Julian and his lawyers had done their work well. The Flavor Atlas wasn't just a list of recipes. It was the Bible. It contained every shred of my institutional knowledge. It detailed the precise temperatures for infusions, the specific mineral content of the water we used, the exact cellaring time for our fermented products, the little-known suppliers of our most unique ingredients, the hundreds of failed experiments that taught us what not to do. It was the company's brain. And my contract said it was mine. I still hesitated. This wasn't just about Leo. This would affect Ben and Chloe and the 100 other employees who were just trying to do their jobs. It would disrupt the supply chain for restaurants and retailers who depended on our products. Was my wounded pride worth causing that much chaos? Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ben. Leo just held a meeting. He announced a strategic partnership. The new guys are taking over R&D and production, effective immediately. Our entire team is being reassigned or laid off. I'm so sorry, Arya. He's gutting the place. That was it. My hesitation evaporated. Leo wasn't just getting rid of me. He was destroying the team, the culture, the very essence of what we had built. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about preservation. Julian had given me this power not just to protect myself, but to protect his legacy. I took a deep breath and began to work. My access to Elysian's internal network had been shut down, of course. But Julian and I had always planned for emergencies. Years ago, I had built a secure, encrypted off-site backup of the flavor atlas, accessible only by a complex series of passkeys known only to me and him. It was designed for disaster recovery, a fire, a flood, a catastrophic server failure, or as it turned out, a hostile takeover by an ignorant heir. I logged into the secure server. There it was, 8 years of my life's work, codified into terabytes of data. First, I followed the contract to the letter. I ran a final diagnostic on all current production batches to certify them as stable and safe, creating a time-stamped and legally sound report. Then, I initiated the transfer. It wasn't a deletion. I wasn't a hacker or a saboteur. I was simply moving my contractually stipulated property from their server to my own. I transferred the core methodology files. I transferred the sourcing database with my private contacts for farmers and foragers. I transferred the detailed notes on molecular gastronomy techniques. I left them with the basic recipes, the public-facing ingredient lists. They still had the what, but the how, the why, and the where from, all the magic, all the nuance, all the soul was gone. It was like leaving someone the sheet music for a Beethoven symphony, but taking away their instruments and any knowledge of how to read music. They had the notes, but they could no longer make the symphony. The entire process took 3 hours. When it was done, I sent a single formal email to Elysian's head of legal and copied the entire board of directors, whose email addresses I had saved for just such a contingency. Pursuant to Section 8 of my employment agreement, I have taken possession of my co-owned intellectual property, the Flavor Atlas. All proprietary methodologies have been removed from your servers. A report certifying the safety of all products currently in the market is attached. I trust your new partners are capable of reformulating your product lines based on the basic information that remains. Sincerely, Arya Rossi. Then I turned off my computer, muted my phone, and went to bed. I slept more soundly than I had in months. I woke up the next morning to the digital equivalent of a mushroom cloud, 37 missed calls, over 100 text messages and emails. The first call I answered was from Chloe. "Arya, what did you do?" she half yelled, half laughed into the phone. "The whole building is in absolute chaos. Leo's new partners from the conglomerate tried to access the production specs for the essences, and all they found were basic ingredient lists. They said it's like trying to build a car from a picture of a car. Ben told me their lead chemist tasted the new synthetic truffle oil and almost threw up. Leo is walking around looking like he's seen a ghost. The board has called an emergency meeting." The predictable call from Leo came around 10 a.m. His voice was no longer smug or condescending. It was tight with panic. "Arya, you need to reverse what you did. This is corporate espionage. It's theft." "It's contract law, Leo," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "I'd suggest you read the agreement your father and I signed. Section 8. It's very clear. I acted within my rights." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, filled with the faint rustling of paper. He had found it. This is insane," he stammered. "My father would never have signed this." Your father was a visionary who believed in protecting the source of his company's value, I said. He also knew you well. What do you want? He finally asked, the question raw with desperation. Money? A bigger severance? I don't want anything from you, Leo, I said, and it was the honest truth. You made a business decision. You decided I was a liability. You decided my work was worthless. You decided to replace art and quality with cheap industrial efficiency. Now you have exactly what you paid for. A company with no art, no quality, and no soul. This isn't my problem anymore. It's yours. I hung up the phone. The rest of the day was a blur of calls from panicked board members, baffled lawyers, and even a few gleeful messages from former colleagues. By late afternoon, I received a formal invitation, delivered by courier. It was from Elysian's board of directors, requesting my presence at an urgent mediation session the following morning at the offices of their corporate law firm. They also mentioned one other person who would be in attendance, Julian Croft. The old lion had been roused from his recovery. The game was about to change. Walking into the high-rise law office felt like stepping onto a stage for the final scene of a play. The conference room was vast, with a view of Lake Michigan that was probably worth more than my apartment. At the head of the long, polished table sat Julian. He looked thinner and he walked with a cane, but his eyes were as sharp and clear as ever. When he saw me, a genuine warm smile spread across his face. He pushed himself up and met me halfway, pulling me into a gentle hug. I hear my son drove the company car into a ditch, he whispered, his voice a low rumble. I couldn't help but smile back. He handed me the keys first. Leo was there, of course, looking pale and diminished, seated as far from his father as possible. 3 other board members, all looking grim, were present, along with a team of lawyers. My own attorney, a sharp woman named Helen, whom I'd hired the day before, sat beside me. The lead board member, a man named Arthur, started the meeting. Ms. Razi, Aria, we are here to find a swift and amicable resolution to this unprecedented situation. Our partners have informed us that without the data you retrieved, they are unable to replicate the quality of the Elysian product lines. Our stock is down 15% in pre-market trading. Helen spoke before I could. Let's be clear. My client has done nothing wrong. She has acted in accordance with a legally binding contract that this company, under Mr. Croft Sr.'s leadership, willingly signed. There is no situation to resolve. The intellectual property belongs to her. If you want to use it, you will have to negotiate a licensing deal. A very, very expensive one. The lawyers on the other side began to bluster about fiduciary duty and acting in bad faith, but Julian cut them off with a sharp wave of his hand. Enough, he said, his voice quiet but commanding the room. He turned to the board. For a year, I have watched my son, with your silent approval, systematically dismantle everything that made this company great. He replaced quality with corner cutting. He replaced passion with profit margins. He took our greatest asset, Aria's unique, brilliant talent, and he threw it out the door because he was too arrogant and too ignorant to understand what it was. He then turned his piercing gaze on Leo, who shrank in his chair. You didn't just fire our best employee, son. You fired the company's soul. And you were too stupid to even read her contract. The 2 hours that followed were an intense negotiation, but it quickly became clear I held all the cards. By the end, we had an agreement, not a severance package, a new contract. I would return to Elysian Foods not as an employee, but as an equity partner, with a 15% stake in the company. My new title would be Chief Creative Officer and Partner, with full, unimpeachable authority over all product development, R&D, and quality control. My entire team, including Ben, would be reinstated with back pay and a raise. The deal with the manufacturing conglomerate was to be terminated immediately, with Elysian paying any penalties. And Leo, he wasn't fired. Julian knew that a public humiliation would only feed the gossip columns. Instead, he was reassigned. His new title was Vice President of Logistics for North American Distribution. It was a glorified supply chain management job, a role where his obsession with spreadsheets and efficiency could be put to use without him ever being allowed near a kitchen or a creative decision again. He was effectively sidelined, put in a corporate box where he could do no more harm. Before we all signed, I looked at Leo across the table. His face was a mask of defeat. "This was never personal, Leo," I said, and I meant it. It was about the work. It was always about the work. He just nodded, unable to meet my eyes. Returning to Elysian Foods was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. When I walked through the doors, the staff, from the receptionist to the warehouse crew, broke into spontaneous applause. Ben and Chloe met me with a massive hug. My lab, which had been dark and silent for a week, was filled with light and laughter again. My team had organized a welcome back potluck, a beautiful, chaotic spread of their own creations. It felt like coming home. The work of rebuilding began immediately. The first thing I did was reinstate our relationships with all the small, artisanal suppliers Leo had cut off. The second was to officially codify the ARIA clause into the contracts of all my senior creative staff, ensuring that their intellectual contributions were also protected. I would not be the only one with a key to the kingdom. Over the next year, Elysian flourished like never before. Freed from the constraints of Leo's cost-cutting, we launched a new line of products that were even more innovative and daring. Our sales doubled. We won 2 prestigious food industry awards. Julian, whose health improved now that the stress of the company's direction was lifted, returned in an advisory role as chairman emeritus. He'd spend a few afternoons a week in the lab with me, tasting new things, his eyes sparkling with that old familiar joy. We were composers together again. Leo and I found a strange, quiet peace. We worked in the same building but in different universes. We were polite in the hallways. He was good at his new job, and in a way, I think he was relieved to be freed from the pressure of trying to be his father. He was a logistician, not a visionary, and he was finally in a role that fit him. One evening, about 6 months after my return, Julian and I were sharing a glass of wine in his office, looking over plans for a new charitable foundation Elysian was starting, one dedicated to funding scholarships for women and minorities in the culinary arts. "You know," he said, swirling the wine in his glass, "that clause in your contract, it was the biggest gamble I ever took." "You gambled on me," I said softly. He shook his head. "No, my dear, I didn't gamble on you. I have never been more certain of anything in my life than your talent. I gambled on the simple, powerful truth that quality is worth more than quantity, that art is worth more than commerce, that a soul is worth more than a spreadsheet. You didn't just save your job, Arya, you saved the truth of this company." I often think about that moment, about Leo's sneering face in that boardroom. He called my gift a liability, my work a waste. But in the end, that very gift, that very work, proved to be the bedrock upon which the entire company stood. The experience didn't make me bitter. It made me stronger. It taught me that knowing your worth is only half the battle. The other half is having the courage and the foresight to codify it, to protect it, and to be willing to walk away from anyone who refuses to see it. My revenge wasn't loud or destructive. It was quiet. It was legal. And it was absolute. I simply reclaimed what was mine. And in doing so, I got back everything I had ever wanted. Have you ever been in a position where you had to fight for your value to be recognized? I'd be fascinated to hear your own stories in the comments. If my journey resonated with you, please give this a like and subscribe for more stories about finding justice and self-worth in a world that often tries to take it from us. And please, share this with anyone who needs a reminder of what they bring to the table. Thank you for listening. May you always know your own ingredients and never, ever let anyone tell you they're not worth the price.